Welcome back, everybody. I wanted to start this video with sharing my location before we get into the subject for today. This is the Wildlife Refuge in Bloomington, Minnesota, south of the Twin Cities. It's one of my favorite places to come and walk. It's probably the most remote you can get within a easy drive of, I guess, depending on what suburb you're in. But the Twin Cities in Minnesota tend to have a lot of parks like this. So that's my context for today. So here's the trail. There's a nice boardwalk that goes out to a platform pretty far out to that lake. It's called Long Meadow Lake. And if you're looking at a map, it's just north of the Minnesota River. And there are quite a few miles of trails down here that run pretty much parallel with the river. I'm heading west right now, and this area in the springtime gets flooded, and so you can imagine all of this underwater. In fact, you can sort of see the flood line right here. That's the high water mark from earlier this year. And typically at this time of year we'd have snow, but it's been a little warmer. So it's also fun. I always like seeing these places in the springtime when they're all flooded, and just really different, interesting look at nature and seeing what floats by and how high the water levels get, and then you see how low they go too. But anyway, this has always been a peaceful trail that I've liked to walk on. And I don't know if you can hear the airplane through the mic, but that's the only downside of this area. It's in one of the flight paths for the international airport here. So it's nice because it's close to civilization, it's close to the airport, and it doesn't take very long to get a little bit into nature, even in this busy metropolis. But one of the downsides of being close to a big city, even if you're in nature, there's always motors. So here we're getting a little more into the woods, and before long I will kind of talk to you about the topic that I wanted to address today, which is remodeling and contracting. So I'm going to bring you on this trail with me. And like I said, I wanted to talk about remodeling, contracting, and give you some ideas if you're thinking about getting into it, and that sort of thing. As in previous videos, I have mentioned that the mic in my beard is there because there's really nowhere else to put it without my beard scraping it and messing with the audio. So it looks silly, but that's the reason. So as I walk, just pay attention to the scenes. Some of these trees that I walk past are huge. And one of my favorite things about nature and just being outside is the trees. Even if they're not very big, I just always find them fascinating because they have just unique things. Burls, knots, branches that are oddly shaped. There's always something to see. So, some people think the woods are boring or whatever because it's just trees or you don't see animals. And in some ways I agree, but if you start paying attention to the trees, I'm going to walk under one here. It's just kind of neat how they all intertwine. They all come in different sizes, shapes, species, things like that. There's a little bit of danger, you get some widowmakers from storms leaning over, and there's a little bit of potential action. You can get your head knocked off. It's just kind of fun observing and trying to learn about them too. I'm not really sure all the species in this forest, or I should say this biome in this part of Minnesota. I grew up in the Northland, which is more boreal pine forests, a lot of white pine, spruce, birch, poplar, those kind of trees, aspen. Whereas down here in the Twin Cities, it's I think it's a mid-latitude forest. That's the biome name. So you get more hardwoods. Although up north we also have a lot of oak and maple, but it's typically sugar maple and I want to say red oak. But there are more species down here. I say down here, south. But a lot I don't know. There's a lot of ash trees that have died because of ash borer, and trees that you don't have up north like walnut. I don't even know the other names right offhand. But here's one of these big boys. There's a widowmaker right there. Always nice to be in the presence of something that can kill you. So, and you can't really tell. Maybe you can tell if I get close. It's just a big girthy tree right here. It's dead. I think this is an oak. But I just love that kind of stuff. So anyway, if I see anything as I talk, I'll point it out because it's kind of fun. But we'll get into the topic here. Okay, so I had a friend, quite a bit younger than me, come up to me yesterday and he asked me if I could sign him on. And I actually didn't know what he meant. And I was like, what are you talking about? But he meant seeing if he could get some work with me since I run a small business. You can't hear that probably on the mic. Little red squirrel chittering. But I have a small business, as I have mentioned in past videos, and it's just me. It's a single member LLC, which I started in mid 2020. So about 4.5 years now, going on 5. And I started it from the beginning with the intention of just having myself as the owner, operator, employee, and not hiring anybody. So I did tell him that, I don't have the kind of work or enough work to keep another person going. I have plenty for myself, which is great. And as I'll probably talk about in a future video here, I'm going to take a sabbatical and idle down business operations and just keep it dormant until I get back. So, there's no work for him there anyway. So we'll talk about the sabbatical and all that I'm going to go on. It's not because I'm exhausted or unhappy with contracting. It was just an opportunity that came up that I really couldn't pass up. So more on that later. When it comes to contracting, and let's just address this guy who's starting out, doesn't really have any contracting or construction experience. What would my advice be? If you're younger, especially, I think just getting experience is what you should strive for. And so try anything and everything out, because it's going to take a little while for you to develop skills in your respective field, whether it's painting, framing, landscaping. And not all of this is in necessarily the realm of remodeling, but what I do is pretty broad. I do anything from exterior remodeling to interior, you name it. Tiling, sheetrock painting, framing, everything short of just building a house. One of my recent projects was to build a shed similar to the one that you saw in my past video that I had built for myself And so that was a full build, but I haven't built any houses yet. So I certainly could. I'd probably need a little help. And I'd probably jump on a house with a buddy before I'd tackle it myself. But from my reference point, from what I do with my business, it's all pretty much whatever the client needs. So I enjoy that. I like variety. I don't like getting stuck in one thing. So get as much experience as you can. Thought I saw a skull. It was a rock. And try it out and see what you like. Because for myself, I started out in high school. I got a job doing odd jobs for a guy who was part-time shop instructor at our high school, and he was also the machine technology instructor at the local community college. And my brother worked for him, my older brother, and he went off into the military, and so I basically just took over his job. And what I did there for 4 years, off and on, obviously I was in school, but I worked there until I got into college. And in fact, a couple of years in, he had a machine shop, a wood shop, gardens, and so I just helped him out at his property. Did a lot of firewood collection because he heated his house exclusively with a wood furnace. Can't really see because of the cloudiness, or the fog. But there's the lake, Longmeadow Lake, still frozen over. And so I got exposure to pretty much everything. A lot of it was menial stuff. A lot of it was planting trees in his yard, taking care of netting to keep the deer off. He had this fence that went all around a big chunk of his property too. And so I was always repairing that, or I would sand his wood projects he would build furniture. One year he did put a big addition onto his garage that became his wood shop. So I helped him build that, learned a lot just through that process. And so I got a lot of exposure to different things with that job that kind of set me up well into my early 20s. And so, I can remember even in those kind of menial tasks and things, some of it comes naturally, but a lot of it just takes time and experience. And I can just remember getting so frustrated at myself for making the dumbest mistakes, even with like assembling a piece of furniture or building a wall, because there's steps, and if you don't have experience, you don't know what comes next or what's this supposed to look like, or what problems do I run into in XYZ scenario. So it took a long time, and I got so frustrated at times that I thought I could never do this. I just always make mistakes. I always screw things up. I always got to redo stuff. And of course, that was me being frustrated because there were plenty of times where it did go right. But if you're starting out, no matter how old you are, I think you just need to get experience, and you need to give yourself time and patience to make mistakes, figure things out. And so what that means for my friend is, find a contractor who is taking on employees, who's willing to take on entry level. I recommended, a local remodeler that I was aware of. I haven't worked for them, but they seemed like good guys. Typically, the smaller but established contracting firms are the ones you want to get on with, because there is more of a kind of a human face there, and they're probably more willing to work directly with you and train you in. Whereas if you go with a big developer, they have probably a lot of employees. Like, just look at any of these big apartment complexes going up or whatever, and they're going to have hundreds of employees. They have a high turnover. It's very corporatized. You get trained in, you get all your things set up, and they know, because there's a high turnover, that you might not stay. So they're also going to probably set you on pretty monotonous menial tasks. You might not get the direct oversight to help you kind of figure things out. So I would just recommend something small. There's definitely a case for a larger firm starting out, if for nothing else, but to see what that's like and to get a taste of, do you want to be on new construction, doing apartments, new houses, housing developments, and that whole thing, because that's a very different beast from remodeling. Remodeling, you get a lot more variety. It's more challenging in a lot of ways because there are scenarios that you run into with different years of construction, different layers of remodeling in the history of that house that require a lot of creative thinking and creative problem solving. So, but it's dirtier, right? It's a lot more messy, a lot more demo involved, a lot more hazardous dust, maybe chemicals, things like that. So, like lead paint, for example, or asbestos, but any construction dust. So, it's a different beast and it's probably less pleasant in certain respects. But if you don't know, might as well just try different options and give it a good year or two before you move on to the next thing, because even if it's monotonous or whatever, you're still going to learn discipline. You're still going to learn how things work on a job site, and it's going to benefit you even if it's not something you particularly enjoy. So the next question might be, well, how long do you go before you get the skills you need? And it's hard to say. It kind of depends on what you do. If you really love painting and you just work with a painting contractor for a couple summers, you pretty much get the idea of how to do it. And if you like it and you want to keep doing that, you could probably start your own business pretty quickly. When it comes to framing, that's more complexity there, obviously. Remodeling, another level of complexity. So I would say with remodeling, in my experience, I had about 4 years with the guy I worked for in high school, early college. And then I actually ended up working for my grandfather, who was a contractor for most of his career. He was a farmer for a little bit. And when I was with him, I had transferred universities and would work with him flipping houses on like summer and winter vacation. And so if you add up all that time, the vacation times, or I should say breaks, and how many years was I there? 1, 2, 3, maybe 3 years of that in 3 and 1 month chunks, probably a cumulative experience of 1 year. That combined with my high school job, I think gave me pretty much the full range. And then if you condensed all my time working at my job in high school, I would say you're looking at another year and a half. So maybe a solid 2 years before I felt comfortable with my skill set, comfortable with how to, do anything from hammer a bottom plate in for a remodeling wall, a new wall for remodeled construction, to cutting into concrete to access pipes to replace those, although that's not something I'm even still comfortable with, replacing pipes. I just have plumbers do that. To mudding and taping sheetrock. So 2 years for sure should give you enough experience. At least in my case, most of that was odd jobs and remodeling. And then from there, in my little history, I ended up, I had a lot of different jobs, traveled, lived in different places. But the next kind of remodeling stint that I did was about a 9-month stint I worked for a remodeling contractor who did fairly similar stuff. we didn't flip houses, but similar types of projects in those houses that I did with my grandfather. And so I felt pretty confident and qualified a couple months into that job, where I kind of knew, here's what I got to do on this job site. Here's the process. Here's the timeline that makes sense for how this is going to go. And at that point, I could probably start bidding if I had a sense of, how much to charge and some of the behind the scenes stuff. But I had enough comfort with the projects that it was easy for me to do a good job on them, and to be unsupervised. I ended up doing a lot of tiling with that guy too. So that's my general take on how long and what you should do if you're just starting out. And then if you move into future and what things could look like for you if you stick with remodeling, I like this tree. I have climbed it and sat up there in the past. And then I did mention the cottonwoods here. There's a big old boy. Let me get close so you can tell. Some lessons to learn. Get right next to it. So that's probably what, I don't know how wide my shoulders are, but it's got to be a good 3 feet wide in diameter. It's a nice tree. And there's a couple giants here. Hard to tell on the video. But anyway, I still hadn't decided to do contracting. So I actually ended up quitting that job because I went back to school. And is that what I did? I'm trying to think the timeline here. No, actually, I went back to China. So I have mentioned that I've lived in China. I lived there for a year on study abroad during college. And then after I graduated, I gave it a couple more years before I returned. So the reason I quit that remodeling job was to go back to China, to Beijing, and become a teacher. So I taught there ESL for 1 year, and then I was a social studies teacher at an international school for 2 years. And then the 5th year, which was the 4th year on my return trip, was in Hong Kong, where I got a master's degree at the University of Hong Kong. So I did go back to school in Hong Kong, but it turns out a few years later, I also went back to school again, typical millennial, and got my teaching license, which I used for 1 year teaching here. And then that's when I finally decided, okay, I want to go into contracting. I want to make more money. I want to be self-employed, and I like doing construction. So, quick note, here's a silver maple. They get pretty big. This is a big tree, but it's got a lot of life left. And I just like the way they look. Here's a little twin split right there too, another one. So rewind to when I was working for the remodeler for 9 months. I joined him. I was his second employee. And then in about 5 months, I think he had brought on 3 more guys, 3 or 4. So what had happened there is, even by the time I ended up deciding to go back to China, things were not going so smoothly with his company. And I think, long story short, the lesson was he expanded too quickly, overstretched himself, and was not able to manage all the projects properly. And he also had a couple employees who weren't very good. And so I think they just kind of wasted time and money. So he ended up going under after I had left. And I'm not sure what became of that company, if it even still exists. But that's a common story. And I hear over and over again, I got to kind of bushwhack here because I lost the main trail. Although part of me wants to go explore that lower part. Let's do that. That looks fun. I don't know why I'm going back onto the main trail when I got endless woods here to explore. So back to employees. This all leads up to, and hopefully this is all helpful advice for what to think about and what to envision for yourself. Because when you first start out, it's going to be frustrating. You're not going to like it. It's going to feel like a factory where you just input, output, show up, do the job, go home. No life, potentially, depending on where you work. But if you kind of follow my story, there's the opportunities open up pretty endlessly once you get to a point where you can start your own business. So when I started mine, like I said earlier, I was convinced never to have employees. And the main reason is because it's so hard to find good employees. And even if you do, and by good employee I mean reliable, teachable, humble, respectful, conscientious, especially when you're at clients' houses in the remodeling business. Guys who understand the game. Like, this isn't just a job, this is a service that you're providing to people. And you need to be aware that you're in their territory, in their space, in their home. And also, when you're working for a guy, a business isn't magic. It takes concentration, effort. And if you're not vested in it, it's very easy to just slack off and treat it like, oh, it's just a job and I can get a different one if I want to. But when you own the business and you run it, you care a lot more about your reputation and about just being a decent person to the people you're working for, your clients or customers. So I started without employees, and every contractor I've talked to since has, for the most part, heard only bad stories from other contractors who decided, you know what, I can grow my operations and hire people, but it's just way simpler doing this myself. So, but you're only going to get there if you're a good employee. If you're not disciplined, if you're not clean, if you're not organized. I did work for a guy landscaping one summer who was very unorganized, and I was his only employee, but I could tell, like, he had a good client base, but he was just so scattered and kind of struggling, I think, because he couldn't really manage everything. But that's an aside. So since I'm here, might as well give you a little pano shot. I love these trees leaning over like they want water in that lake. It's really kind of a marsh. And then there's a nice bit of a hillside behind me. Anyway, I had to let an airplane pass over because I couldn't hear myself think. Long story short is, once you get the skills, once you put in your time and you find yourself not only liking it, but having kind of the character that you need to start a business, which also obviously takes initiative and a bit of ambition, then I would recommend getting something started. Because if you can start an LLC, for example, and just run it yourself, single member, you have a lot of freedom with the business to do what you want. You can take the kinds of jobs you want or pass on others. The biggest thing is probably client base and how you get the work coming in. Advertising is one way, but I found with mine that word of mouth is the best. So having a network of people who need work done, no matter how small, maybe switching out a sink or a faucet, or patching walls or things like that. You don't have to start off big, especially if you don't have employees. you know, you don't have to worry about keeping somebody else busy and fed. So if you're willing to kind of sacrifice some income in the start and, maybe have a little extra time on your hands because things might not get going right away, I think pretty soon after, if you have a good reputation, word of mouth and just people in your own network always have things to do, and you'll get your business off the ground pretty quickly. In my case, I think the catalyst for starting my business was my grandfather also owned a commercial property. That helps. And he had a lot of work for me the summer that I had quit teaching. And it was actually the summer of COVID. So teaching my last quarter went online, which I actually liked because I didn't have to deal with the discipline issues directly. And I had also just bought my house. So I had a lot more free time. And so I was able to start working on my house and things. But he had some work at his commercial building. And we went a solid 3 months. And I think it was by the middle of the summer, I was like, you know what? I don't think I want to go back to teaching. There's plenty of work here. He's offered to keep me busy with certain projects. And kind of fortuitously, I had a teacher colleague contact me who wanted a tile floor done. So it just made everything just kind of flowed together. It was one of those things in life where things converge and it just makes sense. Like, yeah, this is a wise move. So that got me going. There were some periods of downtime waiting for projects and things, but honestly, family is a great place to start. I had a couple of big projects with family members in those beginning months, and then it just kind of grew from there. Church, you should be involved in some community if you want to have a healthy mental state. And so find your community, find your people, and they're going to have projects and things. And so if you have a good reputation and do good work, I was going to show you those ducks, but they flew away. You'll have work to no end. So 4.5 years in, 5 years in, there's really no stopping me as far as this business and growing it if I want to. I like to get to a certain point where everything is comfortable, and then if I want to take some time off, I'm not married to my job. I'm not actually that money motivated either. I'm motivated by this kind of stuff, and it doesn't take any money to do this. So I take advantage of the flexibility of being self-employed, even though I could grow the business, do bigger projects, which eventually I will do. But all that is to say, I have a lot of options and a lot of directions that I can go with it. And unfortunately for my friend who was asking to be signed on, I can't really take anybody with me on this journey because I'm not hiring. But someday, as I do this, I kind of realize that there really is a meaningful benefit to having employees. So I'm not knocking that. And I think it's really good if you're the type who wants employees. And there are certain projects you need employees. Like if you scale up to a certain degree, you're going to have to hire people to help you out. A lot of that you can sub out and just hire other contractors to do for you. But, there's a kind of a, I don't know if you'd call it a humanitarian element to having employees, providing jobs for people. You got to be the personality type for it. But I think do it if you're interested in that and you want to help out, like guys like my friend. I think that's awesome. I'm just not quite the personality for it. Not because I couldn't handle it, but I like the flexibility. I like the freedom of just doing my own thing. And it allows me to travel. It allows me to hop on jobs with other guys. I have other contractor friends in other states that I've gone to work with. And we just do 1099s. I'm the contractor. He's a kind of the lead contractor. And he doesn't have to worry about my skill level or competency. And so I couldn't really do that if I had employees. So it's just options, right? Um, but maybe you want to be the guy someday who can answer my friend and say, "Hey, yeah, I got a house going right now, and I could use some help. And you seem like an enthusiastic guy who wants to learn. Come join me, and I'll kind of show you how it's done." And then you can kind of mentor. So that's my thoughts. Those are my thoughts on this whole question of contracting, getting started. I know it was a bit long, but when I'm rambling through the woods, I like to ramble. Assuming there's a computer, a screen in front of me. Usually I like to shut up so I can watch the animals. But here's an interesting part of the floodplain. I'm sure a lot of this wood floated in too from the flooding. But let me know your thoughts. If I think of anything else, I'll append another section to this video, or I'll just address it in the future. So thanks for listening. This may be the end, or I may come back with some other thoughts. We'll see. I'm going to enjoy nature a little bit right now. I had to show you these two aspen trees. They are giants. I don't see aspen trees this big up north, and we're known for aspen trees. I'm pretty sure they look to me like big tooth aspen. There's quaking aspen, which is very common in more of like a boreal biome. And then there's also big tooth, but these ones, I don't see this very often in this area. So let me turn the camera around. So here's the big brothers here. Look at this thing. That is a huge tree for this species. And then this one is kind of leaning. It seems like a kind of a silly almanac thing about moss on a tree being on the north side. But in this case, that's true. Because obviously the southern side gets the southern arc of the sun, at least in the northern hemisphere. There's like no moss on that side and a bunch on this side. But that's pretty selective. I don't see it. It's not a reliable guide. There's none on that tree or the other one. So unless somebody can correct me, I'm pretty sure these two brothers, we'll call them, are aspen. I don't know how well I can zoom in. There you go. Okay, I did think of one more thing to talk about as far as contracting goes. So I've worked on with different companies or businesses on different jobs with different different guys, some of whom are employees, some are subs. And some of the older guys, I would hear, especially back in my early days, they would say, "Oh no, if you go to college, man, get a degree, because if you stay in this business, your body's going to wear out, and it's just really hard on you. And that actually scared me a lot. And I thought, gosh, I don't want to like get bad knees and all this stuff. And so part of the reason I never got into construction early, or at least as a career, was because of fear of like my body wearing out and stuff. But honestly, like everything, you have to be smart about how you do things. If you're favoring one side, lifting, or with mudding and stuff, I use my right hand, so that's kind of just how it is. But with other things, lifting or whatever, lifting panels, use both sides. Just be smart about ergonomics, how you lift, and how you balance out your musculature on the job. Stay flexible, do your stretches and all that. And I mean, honestly, I'm in better shape than most guys who go to the gym, and I don't go to the gym. So it can actually be really good for you if you do it smartly. So you got to watch out for things. If you're doing one kind of job like painting, then I can see like, yeah, over time, maybe you're going to kind of develop a kink in the neck, or if you're on your knees a lot, and they have knee pads. But I guess maybe one of the positive things about doing a variety of things, from landscaping to interior to new construction to remodels, is there's enough variety where you're not really pigeonholing yourself into one motion or things like that. So I think that is a concern in some cases, but that was a fear that I overcame by actually doing this for a few years. And obviously, I'm a few years in, but I watched my grandfather, and he stayed in great shape until his late 80s, and he's still around, slowing down. But it just depends on how you handle it. The other fear was I had never run a business, and so I thought, well, if I'm in this industry, I'm just going to be an employee. Some contractors really don't pay much, so I can understand that as a demotivating factor. But once you become self-employed, I think in anything, the potential for money is very high. So that's not a concern. So keep your eye on the prize. If you're not making much now, try to go for a future where you can run your own business. Even if you don't have experience with that, and I was terrified, I had no concept of how to run a business, or what do you do? How do you tell people how much? Like, how do you even figure that out? What do you do with the state? And I got to get a license. Like, it was just like concepts. I had no idea like how that all worked. And I tend to be somebody who learns by doing, and then, or going through an experience. Then I have confidence. And that's all it takes. That's all it took for me. Just do it. Step out on a limb, and you find that, hey, this is actually pretty simple. But the longer you're in it, at least before you run a business, the longer you're doing construction and getting experience and seeing how things work, and maybe talking to your boss or whoever's getting these jobs lined up, the more comfortable you'll be when you actually take that step. So if I can do it, anybody can do it. You have it in you, and it's worth giving a shot. If nothing else, you start your business, it fails, and hey, at least you did it. You gave it a shot, and that's not for you. Always have savings. Be smart with your money, because if it fails, you need something to back yourself up. But those are the two main things that were my main inhibitors for starting a business in construction and remodeling. And they kind of melted away under the reality of what I just talked about. So I don't know if you can hear the birds because of the mic on my face. a lot of black-capped chickadees. It's probably the only one I can really identify without seeing it. There's definitely a welcoming atmosphere with the birds. So those are my main thoughts. Let me know if you want me to talk about anything else or if there's anything else I could address. And then I think on the next video, I'm going to talk more about the future of this channel because like I said, I'm going on a little sabbatical and I want to keep track of that. I just don't know if it's going to be possible given the location that I'm going to. But I'm going to try. I'm going to make a bank of videos at least and try to talk about construction related things, maybe urban design, layout, planning, I don't know, nature, stuff like that. Maybe comment on society and culture a little bit, at least insofar as it intersects with those topics. So I'm on a big hollow. Probably something hibernating in there. Big hollow log. And before I go, I might as well just show you this last cool thing with these roots. My guess is that they got washed out since we're in a floodplain here. But the trees, minus the one that got kneecapped, are looking pretty healthy regardless. So, thanks for joining me again, and I'll see you on the next one.